Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. This week, Joji and I wanted to sit down and talk about a topic that had come up I was sitting in on a summit that is about empowering your children. And it was about parenting, but I think this topic lends to a number of different facets of life. And the topic is about emotional intelligence. And for me, I can speak a little bit, and I know that Joji and I were going back and forth just before we jumped on, but it was a very interesting concept because I think that when I first heard it, I thought, okay, understanding emotions, but it really lends to speaking about focusing on your own emotions, understanding what reactivity you're experiencing, and then being able to use that information to respond to situations differently. And again, I was learning it in the facet of parenting, but I think that this can apply in the workforce, in relationships, in friendships. I think a lot of time we have these experiences where we feel very reactive in the moment. And I think that's really hard to maneuver through, especially if, let's say, you have a temper or you have the ability to go from 0 to 100 very quickly. Understanding your own emotions and how you got there, the structural anatomy of your brain and how that lends to that, I think is something that's really important for us to be able to understand. And we won't get too much into the actual brain functioning and stuff like that, but more talking about the way that emotional intelligence can be applied in multiple areas of our life. Joji, what was your first impression when I said, I want to talk about emotional intelligence? What came to mind for you?
I've always prided myself in understanding emotional intelligence because I've always thought, compared to IQ, I probably am a higher score on the EQ just because of how I understood emotional intelligence to what it is and how it's defined. And so I really thought it had to do with your ability to communicate, to read a room, to be self aware in terms of how you're feeling and how you relate to other people. I thought about it in terms of interacting with relationships, and it's in certain ways in the workplace, but not as much. I think of it as when you're a leader, and if you're leading people, how does your ability to understand emotionality affect your leadership style? So I had thought about it in lots of different ways. I think that the parenting angle was really new to me when you brought that up as part of this parenting summit that you were listening in on.
Yeah, and I think that specifically looked at how emotional intelligence again, I talked about it briefly in just a moment ago, but uh, one of the things what came out of this was, which I thought was very interesting, was the usefulness of meditation to regulate your emotions as a parent. And meditation is something that I've now dabbled in it from time to time, but it's never really been a major focus for me. But I'm open to ways in which to reduce my reactivity. Looking back at my experiences, yelling is how I grew up. Yelling was how you got control of a room. That's how I typically try to control when things are going out of control. But what I'm finding is it's just not working. It's not working the way that I want it to. It's not getting the same effect. I see my children and I see their reaction to it, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit what I want for them. So how can I reduce the yelling? And so we had talked about that way, I think, in the beginning of our podcast. And so for me, I was like, okay, how do I put a pause in so that I stop myself from yelling and be able to reflect? And one of the things that came up was meditation, which I was like, I don't know why that didn't come into my mind in the past or why I didn't take to it sooner. But the idea was that if you can put in that pause, you can reduce kind of that reactivity to things.
And after you introduced this topic, I was doing some reading about it today. And as I mentioned before we jumped on, that I was really interested to see how the article described what that looks like and the fact that in the moment, as you're trying to parent, because I think maybe I'm just hitting the question you asked me before. Let's rewind a little bit. When I thought about emotional intelligence and parenting, when you first brought up this topic a week ago, I had actually thought, oh, just looking at these words separately, what it meant to me was okay, emotional intelligence parenting is really how do you teach your children the skills needed to increase or raise their EQ? How do you teach empathy? How do you help them identify their feelings and name them so that they will be more clued in as they grow up with their emotions and then being able to read other people's emotions? When I read the article on emotionally intelligent parenting, it really described it the way that you, Alyssa, had talked about it to me a week ago, in the sense that as a parent, it's important to understand your level of reactivity in any given situation so that you're in control of your emotions and what you portray to your children, so that parenting style is matching the way that you want to raise your child or what you want to display to your children. Am I saying that correctly? Would you say that, or if you can tweak that in any way?
No, I would say that's correct. Yeah, because it really is about an introspective viewpoint, which I think is really interesting because I think a lot of times we're constantly trying to control other people. And okay, if I stop them from doing this behavior, if I, yell enough, if I, again, we're not going into parenting, different types of parenting. We've done that in a previous episode. So if anybody wants to hear about that, go back to parenting styles. But I think that a lot of times we're constantly focused on the other person and how do I control them? And no, we don't step back and introspectively look at like, how am I out of control? And I think that, again, that was one of the things that really spoke to me. And then I was trying to globally apply it to all different aspects because I think that I feel that sometimes in my work, I feel that in my relationship with my husband, a lot of times I'm just like, oh, if I could just get this person to respond in this way, things will be easier. But how am I responding? How attuned am I to how I am being perceived by others? I think is where I went with that.
The connection is there with self awareness and how you're being received and how those messages are being received. But I think that when you break it down to, especially in stressful conversations, whether it is in any of those relationships and aspects of your life that I just mentioned, I think if you stop and you're able to take a pause and gather your thoughts and really be in the moment about how you want to be the architect of this conversation, whether it's with a child or an adult or whomever, that I think is really quite empowering if you have the discipline and the ability to do that in the moment, right? I think it's a very difficult thing to do because, like most people, I think once you reach a certain point of emotionality, I think it runs away from you. And so you have to catch yourself before you get to a point of no return. And I think that's what you and I talked about a week ago when we first talked about this topic was that's the real struggle is being able to catch yourself before you turn that corner. And I think knowing that and judging that and knowing your emotional self well enough to be able to catch it at the cusp of that turn is really hard to do. Gets easier with practice and that kind of thing. But since you listened to this in the last week, have you tried implementing any of these strategies at home? And what have you found if you have, Alyssa?
I cannot. It was funny. So I'm gonna go back for a minute because one of the things, so they were talking about fight or flight. Sometimes when you're like, you're just so revved up, you're in like that fight or flight mode. And they're like, your brain shuts down, like the decision making and the ability to like logically think and make rational decisions kind of shuts off. And so I was just like, yes, that's true for me because honestly, like I'm yelling and I'm just so revved up and there's no fully functioning awareness of, oh my gosh, like I'm doing this again. Can't tell you how many times in the last 8 years or almost 9 years now that I've been like, I'm going to wake up today and I'm not going to yell and I'm going to be this peaceful, calm person. And that's all I wanted to do. And then like literally my feet hit the floor and somebody like does something or something happens in my household. I'm like, ah, and it's just okay, great. That went out the window. So we'll try again tomorrow. Like that's been my mentality. And so it's just always this like, I'm constantly reacting, but there was no, like I just said 5 minutes ago, I'm not going to do this one thing. And then I keep doing it. So I got this Fitbit and, it has this relaxation mode on it. It's like a little app and it actually just does like deep breathing. And so when I am starting to get into that, moment where I'm like, oh, I'm going to react, or, even just like right before I walk in the door, I press the app and it starts to vibrate and it says inhale, exhale. And it's just a simple thing, but that motion and that action of taking some deep breaths actually helps me to be able to put that pause in so I can actually try to keep my decision making and rational, logical thinking online so I can actually see it and be like, okay, you know what? This is not a big deal. This is okay. I'm okay. Like, in the scheme of things, it's not something that needs to be a huge trigger for me. I can kind of slow it down. And so I think that for me has been helpful. It's not perfect. I'm definitely not touting everyone go out and get a Fitbit and put the relaxation app on. But I think that it helps me to just be aware of where I'm at, what I'm thinking, so that I can say, oh, okay, I can do this versus just being reactive and just trying to plow through when I can't seem to get my rational thinking back online quick enough to stop me from reacting the way that I do.
As you were talking, I was thinking about why I love yoga. A lot of people don't appreciate yoga because it's not a cardio workout, but what I find it to be is it's a very easy place for me to go to get to a meditative space. And so I think sort of what you're saying and what I'm going to add to it is that I think most of our time, especially when we're parenting and we just have so much going on, it's like you go from one part of your life to the other part of your life and you're constantly running and there's no opportunity to take a break and take a breath. I think with the Fitbit example, it's a really good illustration of the fact that you don't need 30 minutes in a cross-legged position to sit there and center yourself. There are so many quick ways that you can recenter yourself and that you don't need a lot. For me, what I find is that one of the things I struggle with the most, because right now my life is so focused on work, that my work seems to be so much of my day. And I need very specific breaks in my day to almost be like I'm going from my home to my work. And now I got to be at my work mode. And then when I come home, I need to take my work hat off and I need to be like Joji, who is partner or wife or somebody who dwells in this home, and to really shed that work skin. And those transitions are really important for me. And one way to do that is by doing the yoga in the morning before I go to work, because I almost feel like I'm putting my armor on. I'm sort of getting ready. And then that helps me pace through the day. And then sometimes I've done yoga at work. I've closed my door, closed my blinds, and just done some breathing, or if it's been very stressful. Because I think we need to acknowledge the fact that if we don't check in with ourselves, then things are going to get out of control very quickly. And you and I are very similar in the fact that our work identity is very important to us. And so we want to have our best self at work. We don't want to be, you might let your hair down, you might yell at, or you might get sharp or sarcastic, which I sometimes can be. But I don't want to do that. At work, I want to be professional. I want to have integrity, and I want people to see that I'm serious and like I'm put together there. I feel the way to manage that is to do some stuff before I leave the house, and then I can pace myself. And if it is a stressful day, and sometimes I feel it just in my chest, the breathing is difficult, that's when I know that I need to take a break and do some breathing. And I've got meditation on my phone. I have to see if my Fitbit is capable of doing something like that. I think any kind of a reminder or a cue or something very quick that you could use that's readily available, easily accessible, like on your wrist, I think is like magical. It's magical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one of the things that they talk about was that you could do a 3-minute meditation. Like you don't need, like you were saying, like an hour of yoga. If you can, great. Absolutely do what works with your schedule and whatnot. But I really appreciate what you were saying about how we have to we have to switch gears and put on different hats, and especially like I was like over her nodding because I'm like, yeah, absolutely. At work, I need to be put together. I need to have it. And I think what happens for me is I put on that front and I function as like a professional. And then when I get home and I take off that hat, all of a sudden I feel in all the emotions that I wasn't really attuned to for the whole day. And they come washing over me. And so I think the idea of being able to settle that or calm my nervous system so that I can be present and not just be like, now I'm feeling all the feels that I didn't feel all day long. I might have a really stressful day and I don't really react to it until I'm in a safe space, which is at home. And so I think that even if I got into my car after work and did maybe like a 5-minute meditation or just some deep breathing, something to help me to regain that footing that maybe I lost at some point. Because when you're acting so composed all the time, I think that it can take its toll on you, especially stress. Like I know for me, and we've talked about this a little bit, like my stress I get in my gut. And so I have stomach issues because the stress builds up and it doesn't come out in a way like I'm not expressing it day in and day out in my work or not always at home either. But I'll have stomach issues for a couple weeks. I'll be like, yeah, that's my stress manifesting in that way. And so I think that if we can put something in, and it doesn't have to be really long, but that could really be helpful. And again, it's going back to that emotional intelligence of understanding I'm having some strong reactions right now. And I need to be able to like tune into that, not ignore it, not shove it down somewhere, but really be able to acknowledge it and then works through it. I think that to me is what emotional intelligence is all about. That's what the goal is, to be able to identify this is what I'm feeling. I need to calm that in some way. I have to put in a pause, or else it's going to come out in some distorted or difficult way that is not what I want.
The other thing I was thinking about right now as you were talking is that originally my perception of EQ was more like IQ. Oh, you're born with this at a certain level, and that what you have is what you have. And I think the articles, and I will definitely add them to the show notes. I don't have them in front of me right now. But one of the things that I picked up, not only in the parenting article, but also in the article about emotional intelligence and how it impacts your life, is really that exactly to what you were saying. As you tune into yourself, you can actually build your emotional intelligence. Like as you're working on it, you can, as you become more self aware, you are then building this muscle in your body. And that is something that is also relatively a new concept to me. I really thought that, pat myself in the back, yes, I have emotional intelligence more than this person or that person, but not really as an active way to go out there and seek it to become a stronger skill set that I have, which as a parent, I wish I had known that 30 years ago, because then I think that would have been something that I would have been really interested to do and to really work on, because I think that is a necessary skill that we teach our children, and they watch us and they role model what we do. And so to be aware of the fact that, okay, this is something that I can slow down and work on. And that's actually going to benefit all of us in this family unit, because now we're all working on this individually and together. Is that the way you look at it now? Or how do you feel about your ability to increase that skill as a parent, as an individual, as a family? How does that resonate with you?
I think I see it as a muscle. It's like that muscle work or if you're working out and that sort of thing. And so I see it the same way that this is like something that I'm trying to develop. And as I gain more and more footing, hopefully the ability to understand myself and understand how I'm feeling improves. And I can be able to say, okay, I would love to get to that point, which I think that a lot of times I hear people talking about, like, oh, I'm getting revved up. I'm getting upset. Let me pause. Let me walk away from the situation. I think that I was missing that ability. And by no means am I sitting here saying I've got this down and I'm like perfect at it. I am very much in the very beginning of understanding this concept. But I think that it's one of those things where if I can just work it into my daily schedule, I'll be curious to see how much of that improves my ability to reduce the reactivity that I'm having. And it's in very specific situations. So again, it's not across the board. I don't have a lot of like strong emotional reactions at work, or if I do, again, I compartmentalize them. But I think like across the board, being able to just, again, my goal is to be that peaceful, calm person, to be able to have some serenity in my life. And so if this is an avenue to get there, maybe it takes time, but I'm willing to put in the time to see. So we'll have to check back in 6 months from now and see if I've reached that goal or if I've hit some hiccups. We'll come back to it, I'm sure. But I think it's interesting when you find something that speaks to you. And if you told me 2 or 3 weeks ago, meditation was going to be the thing that spoke to you, I'd be like, huh, that's funny. Absolutely not. Like, I think it was actually a couple weeks ago that my coworker, I forgot what was going on. Something I was having some strong emotional reaction. Nobody knew about it, but I had just told my coworker, "Oh, this is just really irking me." And he was like, "Here, listen to this meditation." And he like literally left his phone in my office. Was like, "Here, listen to this." And I just, as soon as he walks out of my office, I just stopped it. And he came back in 5 minutes. He was like, "How was the meditation?" I'm like, I didn't listen to it." He's like, "Why?" I'm like, "I hate meditation. It's like I don't want to do it." And now 3 weeks later, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try this. So I think it's interesting. I think that sometimes we're very much like, no, I don't want to do that. We'll have to see how it pans out. But for some reason, in the way that it was framed to me over this last week in the summit, that clicked. So to be continued.
I feel like you and I sometimes have parallel lives. I have this joke with my husband and my daughter that I want to get a tattoo. And I've always said, I don't think there's anything that means a lot to me that I would put on my body. When I find that, then I'll be ready for a tattoo. And besides the vanity of what part of my body isn't going to sag or this whole thing, that's just a woman thing and a vanity issue. But interestingly enough, the woman that does yoga that I watch, Adrienne Mesker, which I love, on Yoga with Adrienne, which is free and on YouTube. There's a time where she will say, follow your breath, like the breath leads you. And like you were saying, sometimes you hear the same word over and over again, but it doesn't strike you the same way that it does in a particular moment. And in yoga, it's not unusual that they say that everything is related to your breath. And just like meditations are related to your breath. And I've just been doing a lot of thinking about breath work and breathe and just different things about it. And I've just been thinking about, is that like my tattoo? Is it really about breathing? Because breathing really helps you deal with all sorts of trauma and stress and anxiety. If you look at any kind of a fight or flight reaction or whatever emotionality you're going through, if you could just stop and breathe, 95% of your problem will go away because it's being able to control and manage your body and your heart rate, your fear, your emotion, all those things that are going in with you. You can control all of that by your breathing. And to me, it's such a magical thing that's not pharmaceutical. It's not a device. You always have it with you and you can always use it when you need it. It's like magic to me. And for the last week or so, I have just been dwelling on it. Have I finally found what I'm going to? Because all of a sudden I wanted somewhere that when I get nervous or I get anxious, I want to be like, oh yeah, I can do this. Because sometimes the answer is right in front of you and you don't see it. And I almost feel like now that I've seen it, I want it to be everywhere. And so I know and I'm making light of it. And I don't really know if I will ever get this on my body anywhere. But I do all of a sudden, I feel this pull of like, why is it that all of a sudden today, the idea of breathing is like so important or so like just fundamental, so inspirational, so extraordinary. I don't know. I feel silly about it, but it's really been very life changing. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, but it's just the way it's landed with me in the last week. And I feel really lucky I guess it doesn't matter, Alyssa, how we get there, why we get there, why it's taken us this long, and why it's a normal word we hear all the time, but all of a sudden it struck us. I think we just need to be grateful for that it happened. Would
Right.
you agree?
Yeah, I would, because I think, again, it just depends on what will click. I can't tell you how many books I've read because I have so many books on anger management and things about reining in, and they're all they talk about is put in that breath and pause. And I'm like, okay, that's great. That sounds like some really good advice, but it never translated the way that I needed to hear it. And I think that we all hear things very differently. Like we could have been told this for 20 years and all of a sudden it just clicks for us. So I love that for you. I already have some ideas of what that would look like in tattoo form. So I don't think that it's silly at all. I think it's speaking to you in some way. And I say hold on to that, because when you find something that brings you that sense of um whatever you're striving for, I think that's a really important thing. So I think that we're winding down here, because I think that some part of this is, you know, it is about understanding your emotional intelligence, but it's also about finding what works for you and what will help you to be more attuned to yourself. And I almost think that might even be like, in some ways, a different or extension of this conversation, or maybe we come back to it in some ways, because I think that I could probably talk a bit more about it too. But I think that it's definitely one of those things that we're both having these different realizations, but I agree it's parallel in that all of a sudden we're finding ways to attune to ourselves in a deeper manner that, for me, almost 40 years in the making. And couldn't tell you why it took so long for me to get that. Again, I've only been parenting for about 9 years. So I'll give myself a little grace on that front. But I've had outbursts and anger for most of my life. So it's one of those things where you have to find what speaks to you and then really hold on to that and not let it go, because that's going to be the thing that kind of gets you to the next level of wherever you're trying to go.
And I will say that as a parent, if I can look back in the 27 years of parenting that I've done, and also observing other people's children and their relationships with their children, I think that if there's a way for us to teach our child or our children one thing, which is self awareness and monitoring of your emotion, I think that is such a significant tool to give our child, because I think all of our children have some Achilles heel, whether it's anxiety or it's fear or it's poor decision making, impulse control, could be hyperactivity, could be restlessness, it could be so many different things, right? Nobody's perfect. Everybody has some of that. But if you can, truthfully, if you can breathe through it and you can slow it down and manage it, identify it, and get control of it, I will tell you that is so important for our children to self manage in school, in conflictual relationships with their friends, with situations that really hurt them. And as a parent, we hurt for our children because they're in pain. If we, to learn how to self soothe in a way that makes them feel good, really, it comes down to teaching this kind of a skill. And I think the best way to do that is to role model to your child that we do it ourselves and we're not perfect and we have this skill and we can pull it out of our back pocket when we need it. And so can they. That is invaluable. And I think that would really be, boy, if I could have just taught my child that, I would have felt like I served my purpose well. And unfortunately, I didn't teach her that. And so she's learning that on her own. But that's okay. These things happen. But I do think that it is a superpower if you can teach your children how to do that, because it will serve them for their whole lifetime at every stage of their life. But I agree with you. I think that this is a great topic, and it actually ended up being a lot more, I don't know, just really profound in many ways. I didn't expect all that. So I am grateful for this conversation. Melissa, do you have any final notes or comments before we close this out?
No, I think we've covered it. We welcome feedback from our listeners and want to hear what they took away from this, or maybe they have some ways that spoke to them. So we always encourage everybody to join our Facebook group, the Deconstructed Woman Podcast, or email us at the Deconstructed Woman. Is it woman@gmail.com?
That's right.
Okay. Or you can leave us a voicemail on Spotify for podcasters. So all of these different ways to reach us, but we would love to hear about how this maybe spoke to you. Like maybe you're in this ballpark where, okay, I'll try this meditation thing, or maybe something completely different, but whatever speaks to you, we'd love to hear what that is, what brings you calm and what kind of grounds you and helps you to get in touch with your emotions, and give us your feedback, because we're always opening the conversation for the next person. So I think that was my 2 cents, but I look forward to hearing from others as well.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.